I'm really excited because I've been asked to share my testimony with you. And here's how I feel about sharing my testimony with you. I kind of feel like the chauffeur who was driving around this scientist. And it was like a year-long tour, and this scientist was lecturing on this new scientific method that he had developed. And so the chauffeur was driving him from place to place to place, and everywhere he would drive him, the chauffeur would listen to this scientist give his talk. And so finally, they're about a year into this, and the scientist says, "Man, I'm so worn out. I don't feel like I can even communicate tonight. I wish somebody could just give this talk for me." Well, the chauffeur said, "I've heard you give this talk about, 75 times. I think I have it memorized. I think I could probably give that talk for you. We're about the same size, so why don't you give me your suit, and I'll give you my chauffeur, outfit, and I'll give your talk." And so they went into the auditorium, and the chauffeur stood up, and man, he began to give the talk the scientist had given. It was so good. In fact, it was even better than the scientist, the way he gave his talk. And people were just mesmerized. And the chauffeur, he got so into it, he got such response from the crowd. He said to them, "Now, does anybody have any questions about what I said?" And he forgot to himself, "I'm not a scientist, I'm a chauffeur." And someone stood up and asked him this extremely complicated question. And he didn't have the answer. So he thought to himself, he's really quick, and he said to himself, that's such an easy question that you've asked. I'm surprised you would even ask that question. That's so easy, even my chauffeur could answer that question. I'm going to have him come up and answer that question right now. So that's kind of how I feel today. I feel like the chauffeur. There's so many great ministers here who've done so many great things for the Lord, but I'm honored to share my testimony with you today. I'm probably the least likely individual to be in the ministry. When I was 18 years old, I told my dad, under no conditions will I be in the ministry. I didn't feel called to the ministry. Now, I love the church. I wasn't rebellious against God, but I just feel like I had nothing to give to the ministry. I didn't have any leadership ability, and I certainly didn't have any communication ability. I had nothing to give. And so my plan was to go to Southern California College, one of our AG schools, now Vanguard, play baseball over there. And so my dad, he took me over to Vanguard, and I played the baseball team there. And, stuff kind of rubs off you in life. And I got around the wrong crowd over in Southern California, the baseball team. I was always a good kid, a sheltered kid, never got in much trouble. But one night, about a week into being there in California, some of the baseball players said, "Let's go to Disneyland and sneak into Disneyland while it's closed at 3 o'clock in the morning." I said, "You guys are nuts. I'm not going to do that." But, peer pressure set in. And here I am, 3 o'clock in the morning, scaling the wall, the Ivy Wall at Disneyland. We get inside Disneyland. We're walking around there. All the lights are on, but there's nobody there. We're thinking we're walking around the Haunted Mansion, and Pirates of the Caribbean, inside the back corridors there, and there was nobody there. So we kind of got cocky. We started walking around the main streets. And all of a sudden, a security guard comes over the hill on his bicycle. He says, "Stop, guys." And we just split. I found myself in the jungle by the safari ride, And I mean, within 10 minutes, there were 100 security officers around us. Long story short, they arrest me, and the police come down. They put me in handcuffs. They put me in the back of a squad car. They take me down to Anaheim jail. I've been out of my dad's sheltered home for 1 week, and I'm going to jail. And so when I was 18, I was only about 120 pounds, and I looked like I was about 13 years old. I grew very late. And so this woman, police officer, she walks me through the women's jail before we get to the men's jail. I think she was just trying to scare me. And it's a red light district, so there's all kinds of prostitutes there in the jail. And when I walk through, they're like, "Woo, baby, woo." And I'm like, "Oh, dear Jesus, please forgive me, And so they booked me and put me in a jail cell with 3 of the roughest looking guys you've ever seen in your entire life. One was a big Indian gentleman, Native American gentleman. One was a black fella, and the other one was a white guy. And they're talking about why they're in jail this night. One guy says, "Yeah, I got in a bar fight." The other guy says, domestic, abuse. Then they turn to me, and they say, "Why are you in jail tonight?" I wanted to say arson or, murder or something like that, but I had to be honest. I said, "I just want to see Mickey." No, I didn't say that, but I got out of jail and went back to see the dean, and I almost got kicked out of Bible college. I went through my first year of Bible college, the rest of the year unscathed, and I went back home that next year, and I was 19 years old. We're sitting on the dinner table one night. I was still living at home, and my dad says to me, "Yeah, I heard what happened to you over in California while you're at school." I never told my dad what had happened. He never found out. I said, "You did? Who told you?" I said, "Well, let me just tell you the whole story. So I went on to tell him the whole dramatic story, and he started laughing. He said, "I had no idea about that. You just spilled the beans right there, the whole story right there." He's a spooky man. I want you to know he's a spooky man. But that gives you a little pretext about where I was. I didn't want to be in the ministry. One day my dad says to me, "If somebody calls you and asks you to come preach for them, I think you ought to just go preach just to see if this is what God would have for your life or if you enjoy it." I said, "Okay." Someone asked me to come preach, but who's going to ask a guy who doesn't want to preach? 2 weeks later, I get a call from a man named Eugene High School in Goodyear, Arizona. And he said, "I've never met you nor your family, but I just feel compelled in my spirit to have you come preach at our church. Would you come?" I'll go back to my dad and accuse him of setting the whole thing up. And he said, "No, I've never met the man. But you said if God opened the door, you'd go." So I went that night out to Goodyear, Arizona, and preached. I took one of my dad's sermons and memorized it the best I could. I stumbled and stammered through the whole thing. It was awful. But when I got to the altar call, that part was natural. And I gave the invitation that night, and a woman came forward and gave her heart to Jesus Christ. And that moment changed my life forever. From there, I met my wife, and we began traveling the world as evangelists. But about 2 years into that, I started to notice that every church I would go to, I would fall in love with the people. And I just wanted to stay there and help them grow in their faith. And so I quickly learned that I'm probably not an evangelist. God's called me to be a pastor. And so my dad put the word out that my son wants to be a pastor. And I thought people would come knocking on my door. I was Tommy Barnett's son, but nobody was knocking at the door. And finally, in 1996, a pastor from Dayton, Ohio, came to our pastor's conference. And he had pastored the church for 47 years. He was an old Church of God kind of war horse there. Actually sued the Church of God, got the rights to his building so he could stay there in Fairborn, Ohio. And he asked me to come be a part of this church and lead this church. And he said, I'll stay around and you can be the pastor, but we'll be co-pastors. And I said, "No, that's probably not going to work out. A two-headed monster is not probably a good thing. So just keep pastoring the church. And, if you're looking for a pastor, I'm your man." But nobody else was calling. So after 10 months, he just kept pleading with me to come. And I went back to Ohio to pastor that church. Within 10 months, the church has gone from 170 people to about 600 people in attendance. We bought 4 buses. We were just doing all the things that my dad had taught us how to do. And then we learned one day this was not an Assembly of God church. It was an independent church. We learned one day that we were about to bring the church into the Assemblies of God. We had all the paperwork set up. A vote was going to take place on Sunday morning to bring the church into the assemblies. On Saturday night, I got a call from one of our board members, and he said, "The pastor of the church says he owns the church, and he's changed all the locks of the church. He says he's locking the congregation out tomorrow. There will be no vote." So we get in the car, we drive down there, and I mean, they have all their guys there ready to fight, and the police is there. It's just a big, awful mess. And the police look at the papers, and the pastor indeed did own that building. And the police said he can do what he wants. If he wants to block the doors, he can do this. So the next morning, imagine this, our board is outside of that church with a little flyer saying, "Luke will be at the Holiday Inn tonight," explaining what is taking place here. So that night we went to the Holiday Inn. About 500 people showed up in that ballroom there. And I said, "I've moved my wife here, from my new bride from Arizona. We believe God's called us to be here. What should we do?" And the Assemblies of God came in, and we established Beaver Creek Assembly of God Church. And we launched an Assembly of God church in Ohio. We stayed there for 4 more years. We bought a beautiful 75,000 square foot facility, about $1.5 million, and raised up a great church in Dayton, Ohio. Well, about 4 years after that, I got a call from a church in Los Angeles, Whittier, California. And they were going through a similar situation. They were in dramatic decline, and they asked me to come and pastor the church there and make it a kind of a transition, make it a prevailing church. And so I went to Whittier, California, a church of about 400 people. At one time, it was a great, church running about 1,300 people, but the community had changed around the church, and it was 90% Latino now, but the congregation was still about, 90% white people, and so they were not having too much impact on the community there. Well, we began to reach out to the community there and buy buses, and all of a sudden we begin to see all those battles take place once again. And for 7.5 years, I battled once again with a pastor who had been there for 36 years. And I began to wonder, man, there's a pattern going on here. Why am I going through all these battles with these pastors, who invite me in, but they don't want to see the change taking place? I stayed there 7.5 years. We transitioned that church. We went from 400 people to 1,300 people, but it about killed me. And one day I called my dad and I said, Dad, I think that my time here in Whittier is done. I've been here 7.5 years. I think I've just kind of lost the burden. I've shed so much blood here in transitioning this place. I don't know that I can go on. And my dad says, don't resign. Don't resign. Just stay there until something else, opens up. But I really felt that my Heavenly Father was telling me that my time was done. So I walked right into that board meeting. I told him that I think I'm done here. My time is done. I moved back to Phoenix, Arizona. Now, my dad, he's not the kind of guy to hire his kids. Nothing wrong with that if you hire your kids, but he's always the kind of guy that said, you're going to go out and you're going to do something, on your own. You, with the Lord out there, you're going to build something on your own. And so that's what we did in Ohio and in California. So when I moved back to Phoenix, my dad still wasn't in the hiring mode. And I was traveling and doing some evangelistic work, and he was going back and forth to Los Angeles a lot during that time because he was doing the Dream Center over there. So he was having me sub and preach a lot for him, on weekends and midweeks. And I think that the honorariums got so heavy for him, the board finally said, we need to hire Luke, and bring him here. It's just way too expensive. And so I became the executive pastor. And we grew the church, together until about 2011. 2011, my dad had to have a heart valve repair. And he went under the knife, and he was out for about 9 months. It was a very difficult recovery for him. During that time, he told the church, before he was going in for his operation, I'm going to be out of the pulpit for about nine months. And I've asked my son Luke to lead this church while I'm gone. And I've asked him to lead this church the way he would lead this church if I were in heaven, if I weren't around. So he's going to make some changes, and I want you to go with him. I want you to give him your support. But I've asked him to lead this church in the way he feels God is calling him to lead it. And so that's what we did. And we began to make some changes in the church. Church began to grow and flourish. My dad came back. His surgery was February 11th, 2011. He came back for his first service in June, late June of that same year. When he came back, he sat in the front row. Everything had changed. The music had changed. The lighting effects had changed. The length of the service had changed. Everything had changed. He said, Luke, this is a different church. I don't even recognize this church. I got people greeting me in the parking lot asking me if I can help you, sir. Is this your first time at the church, sir? I feel like it's a totally different church. And he said, and I love it. This is one of the greatest services I've ever been in my entire life. He went right to the board, and he told the board, he said, I have my answer. For years, we wondered how we transitioned this church. This church is already transitioned. It's already done. This is not my church anymore. The people have raised Luke up on their shoulders. Well, my dad said, I'm going to move to L.A. because it's not right for me to stay here. I've been a man of impact in this city. It wouldn't be right for you to have to live under that legacy. And I said, Dad, if you go, I go. I'm not going to do this alone. I want you to stay here with me, and help me build this church. And so he said, that's the only way I would stay is if you want me to stay. And we made that deal with the board. And it's been such an amazing transition. In 2011 to 2013, I became the lead pastor, and my dad remained the senior pastor. That was the agreement. But he got healthy and strong again. And he started traveling the world, and doors began to open for him. And so he was so busy that we couldn't even have board meetings. He was still the chairman of the board. And so in 2013, he said, we just need to have a church vote and just make you the senior pastor of the church. And so that's what happened in 2013. Now, here's where the story really begins. Because from 2011 to 2013, while I was the lead pastor and he was the senior pastor, things were going so well. The church was growing. We were getting ready to start a fourth weekend service, and a pretty large auditorium there. And God was really blessing the church. But the moment he passed to me in front of the church a baton, a literal baton that was from Dr. Bill Bright to Tommy Barnett, it said for 5 million trained pastors. That's the baton he handed me. I'm like, I don't want to touch that baton, Get the thing away from me. How would you like to grab a hold of that thing, But when he passed that to me, something changed in my spirit in that moment. All of a sudden, I felt the mantle of that place resting upon my shoulders. And I got to be honest, I'll talk more about this tonight, but for the first time in several years, I just felt an oppression or a depression that fell upon me. And after many years now of thinking about what that was, I knew that Phoenix First Assembly, now Dream City Church, had always been led by a man with a God-sized dream, with a vision directly from God. I knew that, and I knew in my heart I didn't have that. I knew I could preach a little bit, I could lead a little bit, but I didn't have a dream. I didn't have a vision for the future of our church. I didn't have a picture in my mind that was going to produce passion inside of me, something that would drive me to get up every single day of my life for the next 10, 20 years of my life. I didn't have that. And it was a terrible feeling inside of me. And so I did the only thing that I knew how to do. Behind our church in Phoenix, there's a big mountain. We call it Prayer Mountain. And as a little boy, I'd watch my dad climb that mountain every single day in the summer when I'd go with him to church. He would take a couple things with him, a cup of coffee, Starbucks, and his Bible, and a newspaper. And he'd climb halfway up the mountain. He'd read the newspaper with the Lord every morning, and he'd read his Bible and drink his coffee as he looked over the city of Phoenix. And there God would speak to him about the future of his life, what kind of sermons to preach, what kind of programs to have in the church, how to reach the community. I watched my dad for so many years go to that mountain and hear from God. I thought, man, it worked for Dad. It's got to work for me. And so for 40 days, I went on a Daniel fast. I ate nothing but birdseed and twigs and leaves for 40 days, man. I went from 170 pounds down to 147 pounds in those 40 days. And for every day, I'd go up in that mountain. And I began to say, God, I got to have a dream. I got to have a vision for the future of our church. I'm going to die. I won't do this. I can't do this. I'm not a maintainer. I've got to have a dream. And on that mountain, during those 40 days, I learned that, this is 2013, I learned that in 10 years, our church was going to be 100 years old. Isn't that amazing? And so I thought, God, what do you want our church to look like on our 100th year birthday in 2023? Show me a picture of our future. And man, God just began to download that dream. Number one, I saw a picture of our church becoming the arts capital and hub of Arizona. You know, that the great Broadway shows and great musicals would no longer be done at Arizona State University or University of Arizona, but they'd be done right there in Phoenix, Arizona, in our campus. We're going to revive the arts. The world has taken the arts from the church. They began at the church. We're going to revive the arts in the church. Number two, I said that we're going to reach 50,000 people with the gospel of Jesus Christ by the year 2023. I didn't know how that was going to happen. 50,000 people in our church. We have a 5,000 seat auditorium, but that's like 10 weekend services. How does that work? I didn't argue with God about that. I just received that by faith. I just said, okay, you're going to figure it out, God. We're going to figure it out together. Number three, I said, we're going to build a new lobby out in front of our church. We never had a community center in front of our church. And it's going to take a very large lobby out in front of our church. And we built about a 20,000 square foot lobby out in front of our church in the last couple of years here. Number four, we said we're going to be a multi-site campus. We are going to stretch out campuses all across the state of Arizona. We're going to have a prevailing church in every single city of Arizona. We're going to impact this state by 2023. We've been saying now, we joked around a lot about this early on, but we said that it's our dream now to see Arizona become known as a Christian state. Wouldn't that be amazing? If there was one state in America that's known for, that's that Christian state. Now, some of you say, well, that's a pipe dream. Well, there's precedence for this. We have a state known for Mormonism, don't we? What state is that? Utah. We have a state known for entertainment, don't we? California. We have a state known for oil. We have Texas. We have a state known for, commerce and money. That's New York City. Why can't there be one state in the United States of America that's known for people who love Jesus Christ with all their heart? We're going to go for it, friends. That's what we're trying to do in our state in the next 8 or 10 years here. So that's our little dream. At least we tried. Amen. And the last thing we said we want to do is we want to train 100,000 leaders at our dream conference over the next 10 years. And so I came down from the mountain, and I knew clearly, I could see clearly what God wanted us to do. Now, the next step was to share it with the church. That's a pretty big dream to share with the church, isn't it? But I learned along the way that secret faith is shallow faith. If you have a secret kind of faith and you don't want to share it with anyone, that's really no faith at all. The moment you begin to share the dream gets out there. It starts to work. People start to network with you. And God starts to make that dream come to pass. And so I shared that dream with our people. I said, now I learned that we're going to be debt-free in the year of 2023 if we just keep paying our bills, but not if we build another $8 million lobby out here. So we're going to have to take a miracle offering every year for the next 10 years where you guys bring your best. And so 8 weeks later, when I came down from the mountain, we took our first miracle offering. And the church gave $1.75 million in cash toward that future lobby expansion. Don't you know that did a lot for this young pastor, just beginning that church? And we built that lobby out in front of our church in just 3.5 years, just debt-free for the glory of God. Well, the part I really worked on hardest was becoming a multi-site church. I brought staff in from James River Church to, who are professionals, to help us, in the multi-site effort, and nothing was happening. We were getting advice like, go out and buy a storefront somewhere, and I didn't want to spend $1 million on a storefront, and I just felt like God was going to do something for us. Well, about 2.5 years into that 10-year dream, back in 2016, I had my family in New York City together. And I said, I just feel like we should pray about a church in North Scottsdale. Beautiful 27-acre campus there, 1,000-seat auditorium just built, but I kind of heard they were struggling a little bit. And I've known the pastor loosely over the years. I just really feel like, I need to go talk to him when we get back to Phoenix. So we prayed, and our family did in New York City. I get back the next Thursday, and I go to study at a Starbucks in North Scottsdale. I haven't seen this pastor in 15 years. I'm sitting there with my head buried in the laptop, and all of a sudden, I get a tap on my shoulder. I turn around. It's that pastor. He said, Luke Barnett, is that you? How are you doing? I thought I saw a ghost. I said, I was just praying for you last week and praying about you. Within 10 minutes, he was asking us, would you please take over our church and take over our campus there? God gave us a $12 million campus in a heartbeat like that. Well, we were so excited about that. And we went to Scottsdale, and God began to bless the church in Scottsdale. And then about 3 weeks into that launch, another church in Glendale, Arizona. Now listen to this. This is a Lutheran church. This was a pastor named Walt Kallestad. Some of you know that name, Community Church Joy, the largest Lutheran church in America at one time, about 10,000 people. Well, he had heard what had taken place in Scottsdale. And he was trying to transition his church. And so he called my dad and said, can we have lunch? Do you think, and they had lunch, and he said, do you think that Luke would make us a Dream City church in Glendale? And my dad said, well, we'll have to talk to Luke about that. He couldn't wait to call me on the phone and tell me. Well, within 4 weeks, we then launched, we got a hold of that 75-acre campus in the epicenter of the city, a 2,000-seat auditorium, a big youth center, a gymnasium, 800-student school. And in an instant, in a heartbeat, that was just given to us. And we launched Dream City Church in Glendale. This is a supernatural thing that God is doing, creating this moment. Well, we have a Dream Center, in Phoenix, Arizona. And one of the young ladies that was rescued at our Dream Center, she was a member of the LDS church up in Colorado City. Some of you know the name Warren Jeffs. Remember that name, Warren Jeffs? He was an infamous polygamous leader. And the federal government came down on Colorado City. They arrested him. He had 85 wives. He had a couple hundred children. And he had built a 10-acre compound, all buildings, to house all 85 wives and hundreds of children. Well, his 65th wife escaped from that compound. She made it down to our Phoenix Dream Center. And really, what it was just a big human trafficking ring going on. And she was rescued by our Phoenix Dream Center. Well, the feds then went in, they arrested Warren Jeffs, put him in federal prison for the rest of his life. Let me tell you how evil this guy was. There's a cemetery up in Colorado Springs. It's filled with infants less than 1 year old. Because there was so much intermarrying going on, defects began to form on the bodies of these little babies. And he taught that little babies that were less than 1 year old, didn't have a soul. So you can just go ahead and put them to death. And there's a whole cemetery there full of infants 1 year or less in graves there. Just an evil, dark, dark place. Well, this past year in August, the courts awarded the 65th wife of Warren Jeffs the entire 10-acre compound. Well, she didn't know what to do with it, so she asked us, would you please take the compound and would you start a Dream Center and a Dream City Church in Colorado City? And so in October, we launched Dream City Church and Dream Center, Colorado City. The very place that was being used for human sex trafficking is now being used to rescue young ladies from polygamy and sex trafficking in Colorado City. This is a miracle that God is doing through the Dream City Church movement. We're just so grateful for all that He's doing. I tell you, one of the things I've learned along the way is this. And today we have 6 campuses. And 3.5 years ago, we had 1 campus, starting at another campus in Omaha, Nebraska, in just 4 weeks. One of the things I've learned about this journey is this. For many years in my ministry, we were seeing addition take place, and it was wonderful. God was blessing the work. Everywhere we went, the churches have grown, but I never really felt like I saw that supernatural surge of the Holy Spirit in our church. And that didn't take place until I finally got a God-sized dream. And this is what I really believe. I believe for many years of my ministry life, I was operating on a second-hand revelation, rather. I was just doing ministry the way my mom and dad did ministry. I was just doing it the way that I watched them do it my entire life. And it was only when I went to the mountain and got a first-hand revelation from God, a first-hand dream from God, that all of a sudden the ministry got fun. And there was energy there, and there was life there. And we saw the supernatural hand of God push things forward in a way that we could not do it in 1,000 lifetimes, you see. God has done these things in a moment. And I want to talk to you tonight about how to receive that God-sized dream, that God-sized revelation. And because some of us, we kind of feel that inward dying taking place, and we need that fresh revelation from God. And we're going to talk about that a little bit tonight. But I want to tell you, I believe you can run a ministry, you can lead a church on a second-hand revelation. I believe that God honors obedience. But here's the kicker. You won't have nearly as much fun as when you receive a first-hand revelation from God, a dream from God. So this whole transition time has been such a great learning experience for me. And in just a moment, we're going to have a Q&A session where you can ask some questions about perhaps this whole transition process with my dad and I, because we've gone from Phoenix First Assembly to Dream City Church now. And a lot of people ask about how that all came to pass. But I'm really excited to be with you all here today. And I just want to thank you for allowing me to share our story with you. And I can't say it enough that things really got fun. Things really got exciting for me personally in the ministry when I finally got a hold of a God-sized dream. So I want to encourage you, no matter how young you are, no matter how old you are, no matter how long you've been in the ministry, it's so important you get a fresh dream for God for the future. Let God create a picture of your future that creates passion inside of you, that gets you up every single day. And that's when the ministry becomes lots of fun. Thank you so much for allowing me to share my story with you today. God bless you guys.